Think about the 80s for a second. What comes to mind? Probably big hair, right? Neon everything, synthesizers, just this explosion of, almost cartoonish fun. But here's the thing. Under all that color, there was this deep, dark, constant anxiety. A really, really big one. The threat of total nuclear annihilation. So how do those two things even exist at the same time? Let's get into it. And there's actually a perfect phrase for this whole vibe. It comes from the band Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Yeah, the Relax guys. They called it the Atomic Pleasure Dome, and that just nails it, doesn't it? It's this bizarre mix of end-of-the-world dread and this just unstoppable desire to party. The world could literally be ending, but man, the soundtrack was going to be amazing. So that really gets us to the core question here. How on earth did the ultimate horror, we're talking the extinction of our entire species, how did that become the background music for some of the absolute catchiest, most danceable pop songs ever made? I mean, how can something so completely horrible also be so much fun? Okay, so to even start to answer that, we've got to look at the music charts. Because this whole apocalypse thing, it wasn't some niche indie scene theme. No way. This was 100% mainstream. It was all over the radio. It was on MTV 24/7. You heard it blasting from boomboxes on every street corner. And what's so wild is just how many massive chart-topping hits were straight up about nuclear war. You had Nina's 99 Luftballons, which is all about a nuclear war starting by accident over a bunch of party balloons. Then there's Europe's The Final Countdown, basically the ultimate rock anthem for ditching a planet that's about to die. Or how about the Gap Band's You Dropped a Bomb on Me? They literally took the idea of Armageddon and turned it into this super funky dance track about falling in love. This stuff was just the wallpaper of 80s pop culture. So you see this massive disconnect, right? On one side, you've got the music. It's all synth pop, it's upbeat, you can't help but dance to it. But on the other side, you have the actual reality of the world at that time. We're talking about an escalating arms race, the NATO double-track decision putting more and more nuclear weapons in Europe, and you had world leaders seriously talking about a winnable nuclear war. A winnable war. So the music, it was a reaction to all that terror, for sure. But it processed it in just about the weirdest way imaginable. So this whole Atomic Pleasure Dome thing, it wasn't just in the music, it was everywhere. The entire culture was finding these weird, creative ways to mix total whimsy with absolute despair. Facing the horror with this kind of dark, almost ridiculous sense of humor. Okay, get this for a perfect example of the mood. There was a design competition for a nuclear fallout shelter, and the winning design was a shelter shaped like a cockroach. Why? Because everyone just assumed cockroaches would be the only things to survive. And the designers, with a totally straight face, said it could also be used as a roadside folly whilst waiting for the big one. Like, a quirky tourist stop on the highway to the end of the world. It's hilarious and just incredibly grim at the same time. And this cynical vibe even found its way into, of all places, big Hollywood movies. Take Grease 2. Yeah, I know, it was a total flop at the time, but it's a cult classic now. Well, it has a whole musical number that takes place in a fallout shelter. And the song is called Do It for Our Country. But it's not about fighting a war. It's just a really cynical pickup line. It's so over the top and satirical, and it was a perfect takedown of how patriotic duty was being used in the real world. But it wasn't all just dark humor and dance music. That same fear that was fueling the pop charts, it was also fueling one of the biggest protest movements the world has ever seen. People weren't just singing about the bomb. They were marching in the streets to try and stop it. And the scale of these protests, it's hard to even wrap your head around. In June 1982, just for one rally for a nuclear freeze, an estimated 1 million people showed up in New York Central Park. 1 million. It's still one of the biggest political demonstrations in U.S. history. This was no fringe movement. This was a massive, mainstream public outcry. And it wasn't just in the U.S. This was absolutely a global thing. Just look at the fall of 1983. In that one season alone, 5 million people protested across Western Europe against new nuclear missiles being stationed there. In cities from Bonn to Brussels to Amsterdam, millions and millions of people marched. They were all united by this terrifying realization that their homes were basically being turned into the future battlefield for war between superpowers. And then, right in the middle of all this, in 1983, science enters the picture. And it takes all of this free-floating anxiety and gives it a name, a scientific basis, and a shape that was just utterly terrifying. They called it nuclear winter. This theory was pushed into the public consciousness by the famous scientist Carl Sagan, and what he and his team were seeing was this. A nuclear war wouldn't just be about the initial blasts and the radiation. That's bad enough. But the after effects on the climate, they could be so catastrophic that they could literally cause the extinction of the human race. So, here's the nightmare scenario they laid out. First, the nuclear explosions would create these massive firestorms, shooting tons and tons of black smoke and soot high up into the atmosphere. Then, that cloud of soot would spread all the way around the globe, basically acting like a shroud, blocking out the sun for weeks, maybe even months. With no sunlight, temperatures on the ground would plummet, dropping below freezing, even in the middle of July. What happens then? Well, global agriculture completely collapses. Crops fail everywhere. And anyone who managed to survive the initial war would just end up starving or freezing to death. So, you see, nuclear winter completely changed the game. It wasn't just about winning or losing a war anymore. Suddenly, the threat was this massive ecological disaster that could literally kill the planet. It sort of fused the classic Cold War fears with the newer, growing anxiety about the environment, and it created this ultimate, all-encompassing nightmare scenario. So when you look back, the 80s had this incredibly overwhelming fear of annihilation, and it dealt with it by making hit pop songs, telling dark jokes, and staging enormous protests. It was a weird, messy, and, well, a very human way to cope. And it kind of leaves you with a big question, doesn't it? When we look at the anxieties of our own time, climate change, pandemics, all the political chaos, how are we processing our fears